When conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was assassinated during a Utah event, the world reacted in shock, and within hours, a 22-year-old named Tyler Robinson became the face of blame. Headlines branded him a killer before evidence could even speak, and the story seemed sealed, case closed, justice served. But months later, newly released autopsy results are tearing that narrative apart. The medical findings reveal inconsistencies, bullet trajectories that don't align with Tyler's position, missing gunpowder residue, and unidentified DNA that tells a different story altogether. These aren't minor details. They're revelations that shake the foundation of the case and expose how quickly truth can be buried beneath headlines. Please make sure you comment while listening to this update. We will make sure we respond to everything. That's a proof that we are fighting for justice and what is right. Tonight we return to where it all began, not to sensationalize a tragedy, but to search for the truth that was silenced in the rush to judgment. Because when evidence contradicts the story, and an innocent life hangs in the balance, justice demands that someone finally listens. Before we dive into this story, remember this is Detective Kate, True Crime, a channel that stands for justice and giving every case the attention it deserves. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of our investigations. And don't forget, share your thoughts and theories below. Every clue counts. The night Charlie Kirk died, truth died a little too. It was supposed to be a night of hope. A campus filled with energy, students eager to listen, and a man known for his conviction taking the stage one last time. But within minutes, that hope turned to horror. The shots echoed like thunder across the auditorium, and panic swallowed the room whole. People screamed. Phones dropped. Security rushed forward. And in the chaos, one image would define the next several months. Tyler Robinson, frozen in fear, surrounded by police lights and confusion. News broke before midnight. Headlines flashed the same words over and over again: shooter in custody. But no one stopped to ask if the story made sense. Not the angles, not the timing, not the science. The nation didn't want questions, it wanted closure. And so, before the evidence was even processed, a narrative was born. They called it justice. But justice without truth is only performance. And as the hours passed, that performance grew louder. Politicians speaking, media spinning, the internet roaring. What no one noticed was the silence of one voice that mattered most: the evidence itself. This was the night truth was buried under emotion. The night headlines replaced facts, and a frightened young man became the villain the world needed. The question that lingers even now is simple, but haunting. If Tyler Robinson wasn't the shooter, then why was everyone so desperate to believe he was? Utah Valley University, September 10th, 2025. The air was electric that night. Students filled the auditorium, cell phones glowing like stars in the dim light as Charlie Kirk took the stage. He spoke about faith, freedom, and the cost of truth in divided times. The crowd cheered, laughed, argued, the kind of tense energy that often follows his words. Then, in the middle of a sentence, everything changed. The first sound was mistaken for a speaker popping, a sharp crack, then another. But when people saw Charlie stumble, clutching his chest, confusion turned to chaos. Screams cut through the air. The camera streaming live dropped to the floor, capturing only blurred feet and frantic movement. Within seconds, hundreds ran for the exits. Security shouted commands no one could hear, and somewhere amid the panic, a young man froze, Tyler Robinson. Witnesses later said he looked lost, like someone who didn't understand what was happening. Police found him crouched behind a pillar, blood splattered on his shirt, not his own. He wasn't armed, he wasn't running, but in that storm of fear he was visible. And visibility, in moments like that, becomes guilt. Officers moved fast. A gun was found nearby, not on him, not even close, but in the direction he was hiding. Someone screamed, "That's him." And in less than a minute, the narrative was sealed. A shaky eyewitness video hit social media before the ambulance even arrived. It showed police pulling Tyler up from the ground, his hands trembling, his face pale, his voice almost inaudible. "I didn't do anything." But no one wanted to hear those words. The world had already chosen its villain. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights painted the night like a crime scene from a nightmare. Reporters arrived before the coroner. Cameras zoomed in on Kirk's lifeless body, being wheeled away, while Tyler was shoved into the back of a patrol car. And as the door slammed shut, a single truth faded with it, the truth of what really happened in those chaotic few minutes. That was the chaos of that night. A moment when facts drowned in noise, when fear replaced logic, and when one young man's life was rewritten by panic before the investigation had even begun. The rush to judgment began before the crime scene tape even settled. By dawn, every major news outlet had plastered Tyler Robinson's face across the nation. Shooter identified, they declared. Killer confessed by text. None of it verified, none of it questioned. A single leaked police note became gospel truth. Reporters stood outside his mother's small home, microphones in hand, asking neighbors what kind of monster could do such a thing. But Tyler wasn't a monster. He was a student, a part-time store clerk, a young man with no record, no motive, and no voice loud enough to fight back. Inside the interrogation room, Tyler sat under flickering fluorescent lights, shivering in silence. Detectives pressed him with questions that already assumed guilt. Why did you shoot him? Not did you. Each pause he took became proof. Each confused answer twisted into confession. The story had already been written, and the world was hungry for closure. By midday, politicians weighed in. Commentators on both sides turned the tragedy into a weapon for their own arguments. Some blamed hate speech, others mental illness. A few even claimed it was divine justice. But none of them knew the evidence, the missing footage, the mismatched bullet casings, or the inconsistent witness accounts. Truth was no longer the goal, narrative was, and the media, they didn't need confirmation, they needed content. Every headline, every breaking update, every exclusive source made Tyler less human and more symbol. The scared young man from Utah became the face of a nation's outrage. Viewers cried for justice, but what they really wanted was punishment. They wanted someone to pay. Meanwhile, Tyler's mother watched helplessly from her living room. As her son's name trended worldwide, she whispered the same words over and over. He didn't do this, but no one could hear her over the roar of judgment. The presumption of innocence, the cornerstone of justice, had vanished overnight. The system wasn't investigating a crime. It was defending a story it had already told. And as public anger boiled, one quiet truth began to fade into the background. Justice had been replaced by convenience. Because in the rush to convict, it was never about what was real. It was about what was easy to believe. For weeks, the story remained untouched, polished, rehearsed, and broadcast on repeat. But then came the report no one expected, the official autopsy. It arrived quietly, slipped into the public record with little fanfare, yet its pages carried the power to unravel everything. Inside those pages were the facts, raw, clinical, unspun. The medical examiner's findings didn't align with the story the world had already accepted. The report listed 2 entry wounds, each fired from a different trajectory. One bullet struck Charlie Kirk head-on, the other at an angle that placed the shooter to his left, far from where Tyler Robinson was supposedly standing. Even more unsettling, the time of death noted in the report occurred 5 minutes before police dispatch logged the first call. Somewhere in that gap, something didn't add up. Then came the next revelation. No gunpowder residue on Tyler's hands or clothes. The tests were run twice, both negative. Forensic science, cold and impartial, spoke louder than any televised accusation. If he had fired that weapon, there would be traces. Microscopic particles impossible to wash away, but there were none. And then buried deep in the final pages, a single line changed everything. Partial DNA profile, recovered from the weapon's grip, not consistent with Tyler Robinson. Another person's genetic trace, unidentified, untested, and unexplained. The defense seized on it immediately, but by then the damage was done. Public opinion had already built its gallows. Still, whispers began to spread through legal circles, online forums, and late-night talk shows. Could it be possible that the man the world condemned never pulled the trigger? The coroner's notes grew even more troubling. The wounds suggested close-range fire, yet witnesses had testified the shooter was at least 15 feet away. The angles, the residue, the timing, none of it matched. It was like forcing puzzle pieces into the wrong shape simply because the picture had already been printed. Prosecutors brushed it off as procedural differences. Reporters buried it beneath fresher headlines. But behind closed doors, investigators began asking the questions they should have asked on day one. How could the ballistics contradict the confession text? Why did body cam footage cut out just before the shots? And most haunting of all, who left their DNA on that gun? The autopsy didn't just reveal a body, it revealed a lie, and for the first time since that chaotic night, the official narrative began to tremble under the weight of truth. Because when science speaks, even the loudest story begins to fall silent. When the autopsy findings finally surfaced, they spread like wildfire, first whispered by independent reporters, then amplified across the internet. Within hours, hashtags began to flood social media feeds. #Free Tyler Robinson, #Truth for Charlie, #Justice, not politics. What had once been a one-sided story suddenly became a storm of doubt. Across the nation, people who had once condemned Tyler began asking the same haunting question: what if we were wrong? Journalists revisited the footage frame by frame. Forensic experts dissected the autopsy. Even retired detectives began to weigh in, saying what prosecutors refused to admit, that the evidence didn't fit the arrest. On live broadcasts, anchors struggled to balance the new reality with their old headlines. Viewers could sense the shift. Conviction was crumbling into uncertainty. In courtrooms and coffee shops alike, the debate grew louder. College students held vigils calling for due process. Church groups prayed for both families, the Kirk family mourning a loved one, and the Robinson family drowning in stigma. For the first time, the story wasn't just about one man's death. It was about the death of trust. Every institution that had promised truth, the police, the press, the prosecution, now found itself under scrutiny. How could such glaring inconsistencies go unnoticed? How could DNA evidence be ignored, timelines dismissed, and lives destroyed so easily? The questions spread faster than answers could follow. In interviews, Tyler's attorney fought tears as she read aloud the autopsy excerpts. "This young man has been tried by the world," she said, without a single piece of physical evidence proving he ever fired a gun. Her words hit like a quiet explosion, calm, devastating, undeniable. Meanwhile, within the prosecution's camp, silence grew. Statements became shorter, press access restricted, and every time they refused to comment, public suspicion deepened. Online, the tone shifted from outrage to empathy. Tyler was no longer the villain in the story. He was becoming its cautionary tale. In the noise of social media, one comment stood out, reposted thousands of times. "If the system can destroy one innocent man this easily, how many others have we never questioned?" The tide had turned. The nation was no longer convinced. It was conflicted. And in that uncertainty, one fragile truth began to emerge. Maybe justice wasn't served that night. Maybe it was sacrificed. The autopsy had done more than reveal evidence. It had reignited conscience. And now the world was watching not to see a conviction upheld, but to see if truth could still survive the damage done. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded, but the pain only deepened. Away from the headlines and cameras, two families lived in the long shadow of a single night. On one side, the Kirk family mourned a man who had built his life on words, now silenced by violence. On the other, the Robinsons lived with a different kind of death, the slow erasure of a young man's name, the quiet grief of being forgotten by justice. Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, stopped giving interviews. She no longer wanted to see her husband's face framed in breaking news graphics or politicized debates. Friends say she still sets a cup of coffee for him every morning, whispering prayers into the silence. "He was more than a headline," she told one reporter before retreating from public life. And she's right, behind every public figure lies a private heart, one that breaks like anyone else's. Meanwhile, in a county detention cell, barely wider than his outstretched arms, Tyler Robinson writes letters that may never be sent to his mother. To Charlie's family, to anyone who might believe him, the handwriting is shaky, the words simple: "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't do it, but I wish I could undo it anyway." Those words, scrawled on lined paper, tell the story of a soul crushed between two worlds, one that demands punishment, and one that quietly prays for mercy. His mother, Rebecca, still drives to the courthouse every week, even when there are no hearings. She brings food to his attorney, hugs the security guard, and sits in the same seat where she last saw her son in shackles. Every night she lights a candle by the window, a ritual of hope that maybe somehow, the world will see him differently. "They took my son's future," she said once, "but they can't take my faith." Even within the Kirk household, whispers of doubt have begun to surface, not out of betrayal, but exhaustion. Some of Charlie's closest friends, after reading the autopsy, confessed that they didn't know what to believe anymore. "Justice should feel like peace," one of them said quietly, "but none of this feels like peace. The tragedy has become heavier than its crime. Two families, once strangers, now bound by sorrow neither asked for. One grieves a life lost, the other grieves a life condemned. And between them lies a system that promised truth, but delivered pain instead." These are the faces the cameras don't show. The mother who can't sleep, the widow who can't forgive, the sister who can't stop replaying that night in her mind. They remind us that behind the headlines and hashtags, real hearts are breaking. This is the human cost, the ache that lingers long after the news cycle moves on. Because in the pursuit of justice, we sometimes forget the people left behind in its wreckage. From grief rose determination. What began as whispers of doubt became a movement. Quiet at first, then unstoppable. Tyler's defense team, led by attorney Catherine Nestor, refused to let the autopsy be dismissed as irrelevant. They gathered independent experts, forensic analysts, former investigators, even digital technicians, to re-examine everything the system overlooked. Each report, each data set, each second of body cam footage told the same story. The puzzle never fit. An independent ballistics expert from Colorado concluded that the bullet trajectory couldn't have originated from where Tyler was found. A DNA analyst from a private lab verified that the unknown genetic profile on the weapon belonged to someone other than Tyler Robinson. And a digital forensics firm uncovered something even more disturbing: a 4-minute gap in the police body camera footage between the moment the first officer entered the hall and the moment Tyler was detained. 4 minutes missing from a critical timeline. 4 minutes that could change everything. The media, once complicit in spreading certainty, began shifting their tone. Investigative reporters started asking real questions about police conduct, about evidence handling, about motive. A major news network aired a special titled "The Case Against the Case," and within hours, millions had tuned in. Public trust in the original investigation crumbled. The people who once shouted guilties now demanded proof. Outside the courthouse, protest signs no longer screamed division. They demanded accountability. Students, veterans, pastors, and even a few of Kirk's own followers stood side by side, not to excuse violence, but to defend fairness. They chanted one phrase over and over: truth first, justice second. Inside the legal world, the defense filed a motion to reopen the investigation, citing the autopsy's inconsistencies, mishandled evidence, and new forensic testimony. Their petition argued that Tyler Robinson was a victim of a rushed prosecution, a scapegoat created by a system desperate for answers before the facts were clear. And for the first time, a judge didn't immediately deny it. Hope began to flicker again, fragile but real. Even some within law enforcement started speaking off the record. Anonymous officers admitted to procedural pressure, to public demand for an arrest. One of them said quietly, "We needed someone fast. He was there. That's all it took." Those words, recorded in an investigative interview, carried the weight of a confession the world wasn't ready for. And yet, amid the rising hope, there remained a quiet fear. If the truth came out, how many reputations, careers, and political ambitions would crumble with it? The fight for truth wasn't just about clearing one man's name anymore. It was about exposing a system that had chosen convenience over conscience. It was about restoring faith in justice, a faith that had been fractured the moment Tyler Robinson was led away in handcuffs. The movement was growing. The cracks in the story had become fractures, and the fractures were becoming a collapse. Truth was no longer hiding. It was pushing, breaking, clawing its way to the surface. And as the walls around the official narrative began to tremble, one thing became certain. The truth wasn't lost. It had just been buried. And now it was ready to be unearthed. In the end, when the cameras are gone and the headlines fade, what remains is not the noise of a nation divided, but the silence of questions that still echo in the dark. The Charlie Kirk case began as a tragedy, became a spectacle, and ended as a mirror, forcing us to see the cracks not only in our justice system, but in ourselves. We live in a world hungry for answers, desperate for villains, impatient for closure. But justice, real justice, cannot be rushed. It demands humility, patience, and the courage to say we were wrong. Somewhere along the way, the truth stopped being something we searched for, and became something we tried to control.